Well, my first question is, in his press conference today, Chancellor Dan Jones mentioned that you were sort of thrown into this thing. You really didn't have too much of the decision-making process. It was mainly the board. So my first question to you is, do you agree in the board's decision to not, bring back Chancellor Jones or even the contract that was proposed to him?
I think the answer to that is Dr. Jones and I work for the same board of trustees, and I don't start the job formally. I'm commissioner-elect and don't start until April 15th. The decisions are made by the board. As commissioner, I work for the board, and so I just want to clarify it that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand. I mean, he worked for the board and he disagreed with their decision, so that's what I'm kind of asking you. Did you agree that based off of the information released to us and what the audits found, did you believe that his contract should have been terminated? And do you also feel like the proposal made to him was fair?
I think the Board of Trustees' actions speak for itself, and I think that the release today covered what the board thinks are thought as part of that decision-making process. I appreciate the question, but that's going to be my answer.
Okay.
Mr. Borsig, I have a question. From the contract that was given, I'm pretty sure it was said 21 months, and then he would have to retire after that 21 months. So it kind of seemed like the contract was basically an ultimatum. It just seemed like there was no room for improvement for Jones. So it kind of has talked to me about why was it just such a short time period and not another idea for the contract.
The discussions that Dr. Jones had with members of the Board of Trustees were wide-ranging. I'm not going to discuss or disclose the details of those conversations. I think that his statement speaks for itself.
Okay, and also, I mean, I understand that you're not in charge. The board is ultimately in charge. But from what we saw today is, do the students and faculty and all the public's opinion just not really matter when it comes to, they wanted Jones reinstated, but I mean, does their opinion just not matter at all?
I think the answer to that question is this. This Board of Trustees are smart, bright, caring people who take their responsibility to the state of Mississippi and to all 8 public universities seriously. They also have the legal responsibility for the oversight of the finances for all 8 universities, and they apply the same standards to all 8 universities. The issues that were identified involving the medical center over some period of time that were confirmed in the audit clearly, as the release said, was what drove this decision. These folks have that legal responsibility, and sometimes they make tough calls. I think you can look at the history of decisions in recent years by the board. This is not the first tough call that they've made. And when the board makes tough calls, it's controversial.
Yes, sir. I completely understand that. Now, there's been a lot of talking going around campus right now, and they're saying that the board basically made this decision without speaking to people on campus. And so a lot of people do not trust the board, or that's what I'm getting at from conversations going around. So, I mean, what can be said from the board to sway that opinion?
That might be a conversation for another day. The search process to select the next chancellor is very inclusive. All of the constituencies of the university will be engaged in that process. And I think that is part of the conversation as we go forward. And I go back to what I said. There are certain responsibilities of the Board of Trustees, and when they make those decisions, they're controversial. And I think that this is clearly one of those circumstances.
And you talked about a lot of decisions are going to be controversial. From what I've heard, there's going to be more pressure on the board from the public and from the university. It seems like. So how is the board going to react to this?
That again, that's a question for another day. The board.
Why is it? Well, why can't you answer that today? I don't understand.
I'm here to talk about what happened today.
Right, but that directly affects the future of the board, and which you will be a commissioner of. I mean, pretty soon here. So, I mean, how will the board deal with that? With the backlash? I mean, if the public can't trust the board that governs their institutions, I mean, that directly affects your job. It affects everybody on the board's job, and the state of Mississippi, for that matter.
When you make tough decisions like the Board of Trustees has just made based on the reasons that they've made them, which are outlined in the release, there's going to be controversy. And I think that's the answer that I'm going to give you to that question. And it's the board's responsibility to make those decisions. They don't make them lightly. They don't make them quickly. And these are thoughtful, hardworking, caring folks who want the best for the 8 public universities and for the state of Mississippi.
Okay, and in a yes or no format, can you answer to me if you think the board actually even cares about what the public has to say? As an incoming commissioner, do you feel like you're going to be working with people that care about the public's opinion?
The Board of Trustees listens broadly, but it also has very clear responsibilities for the management of the institutions, and those are not incompatible, but the board also has a responsibility to make hard calls, and I think that it does not, it's not a mutually exclusive situation.
Okay. Well, one of the hard calls I understand is obviously removing Jones himself, but I've been told by many faculty and that basically his philosophy is kind of what got him fired in the first place, or not fired, he just didn't have his contract renewal, and so basically they feel like that with the new leadership it's going to have to be a change in philosophy. Therefore, just completely changing everything that Ole Miss has grown in the past few years. I mean, do you agree with that, or how would you explain that?
I think I'd answer it this way. And this is pretty consistent with what the Sunday afternoon that we talked earlier. The trajectory of the University of Mississippi is a great trajectory. The vacancy will attract terrific candidates nationally. And this decision by the board was based on the issues that are made public.
Right. I hate to interrupt, but I mean, I have faculty members being quoted saying that these are dark days for Mississippi. I mean, what do you have to say in response to that?
I would say I'd go back to what I said. When the board makes tough decisions based on its legal responsibilities, there's differences of opinion, and I think that what you're reflecting to me are differences of opinion.
Okay, there's been an interesting article, column, whatever you want to call it, released in the Mississippi Business Journal recently. It has to do with Chip Morgan, who was just recently, appointed. He will be serving on the board, and it's an email from a member, I guess, of the Delta Health Alliance, or who was an advisor, basically emailing him to kind of use a scorched earth policy and discredit former Chancellor Robert Kayat, and it kind of has to do with Chancellor Jones as well. I mean, can you kind of comment on that maybe? I mean, he has been appointed to the board now, and he was sent an email like that. I mean, that definitely hurts the way the public sees the IHL for sure, right?
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I'm talking to you about what this Board of Trustees made the decision on. The 4 new trustees have not joined the Board of Trustees. I think you probably know more about that email than I do, to be honest with you.
One last question from me is, if there is a huge backlash from, the media, from students, faculty, and from the university, is there any way that there could be another possible contract to be discussed?
Dr. Jones addressed that, I think, in his statement today, and the board did too. The board has asked for the planning to begin for the search for the next chancellor. I think that answers your question.
Yes, sir. When will that search start? Obviously, it has to start very soon, if not like in the next few weeks.
I think that searches don't start rapidly, and I think that something will be forthcoming in the next few weeks about what that schedule looks like and how that process will go forward.
All right, Commissioner Borsig, I think that's it. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions.